Hi boys! Welcome back to the channel, YouTube. I'm Navy Dad. This is Rusted Bolt's Garage. Big block. That's right. So, okay, first of all, I want to apologize for not getting the mirror video out yet. Long story short, I have to get this truck back on the road, and so I'm going to start doing the video series of doing the big block swap. So that's right, we are swapping in the 4.3 liter dead boat anchor V6 in for a 1994 454 from a motorhome with only 31,000 miles on it. The engine is still shiny clean. And of course, a 4L80E. 4L80E, say that 3 times fast. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is do hopefully weekly series as I start working on the truck. Of course, I work long hours, so sometimes, you know, stuff just doesn't happen. Okay, so next thing is, before I pull the engine out, I'm going to swap the springs out. Obviously, you cannot use V6 springs with a 454. I mean, you got, what, almost 300-pound difference in the engine transmission package, so maybe it's a little bit more. But I want to do that with the V6 still in there just because it'll make it easier. So that's going to be the first thing that we're going to do. So there's certain things I'm just going to do, like fast forwards too. Like pulling the front end apart and removing the radiator core support and things like that. It's all pretty simple stuff. There's lots of videos on that. But when we get into the nitty gritty of removing the engine and what we need to do to put that big block in and how we're going to utilize as much of the original V6 wiring harness as possible. So now I know there's there's a lot of LS swap videos out there, and that's what a lot of people do, and I just didn't want to do that. I wanted old school big block. I wanted torque. I mean, for instance, like I had an 02 Tahoe 5.3 that I was going to put in the Chevelle, then I considered putting it in here, and they're both getting big blocks. But okay, yeah, so you can make more power, but can you make more torque? Well, you got to do a lot of work with those engines to do that. I mean, the 02 5.3 liter was about, I think it's 285 or 295 horsepower, and it's about 335, 355 foot-pounds of torque. I can't remember right off the top of my head. I'll put that down here. This 454 is only 255 horsepower, but it's 415 foot-pounds of torque. So that will smoke the tires. I don't have to have a whole lot of horsepower. It's just going to be fun, and you know, there's some street cred to have a big block, right? I mean, that's all it is. And it was cheap. So, but there are a lot of videos out there doing V6 to V8 swaps in the GMT 400 series truck. But they don't go into all of the nuances. Like there was one video I saw where the guy just kind of showed what he did after the fact. And another one where they just kind of, well, it just didn't give a whole lot of information. And I know everybody wants to do an LS swap, but there's still some of us out there who want to do a V8 swap, a standard small block or a big block V8 swap, and there's not a lot of information out there. So again, I'm going to make this as clear as I possibly can, because you know, my whole thing with doing this truck is doing things on a budget, because that's what I have. It's a small budget. But who's buying these trucks? It's kids. And when I was growing up, I had a mentor that helped me learn how to do simple things like brakes, because my dad doesn't know anything about cars. He really doesn't. He calls me. So I had a mentor that helped me. You know, I did my first brake job, you know, carburetor rebuild, all that kind of stuff when I was a kid. And it was just cool to have that experience. But today's cars are so expensive, but these trucks are still very affordable for a kid, a high school kid who wants to modify, who wants to do this stuff. But again, everything's so damn expensive today. But there is ways to do that. So that's my whole edict here, because you may have a kid that's out on a farm somewhere. You know, he's 14, 15 years old, or she, and you know, grandpa gave them the old truck. And maybe they have another truck that's a rust bucket. This one's got a dead V6 and this one's got a good V8 in it, and they want to do the swap in the barn. Well, you can do that, but you've got to know what you're doing when it comes to electronics. So that's my whole purpose here. So first thing we're going to do, swap the springs out. Well, first thing was actually the bed, but you know, gotta have some fun with that. Okay, stop the presses. Hold on just a minute. But now you don't have to. This episode is going to convert into just about the springs and the freaking bloody...
Lots of bad words. Oh, really bad words. Ooh, even worse bad words.
Motor mounts. The V6 motor mounts. Oh no, it's not just the V6 motor mounts. It's the V8 motor mounts. So, let me explain why this is such a pain in the ass and why it's important to do research, because I didn't go far enough with my research. So, we're going to get over to the front of the truck and I'm going to explain the motor mounts and why they're such a pain in the ass to deal with. And also the springs, which are okay. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about springs real quick. Now, this is the original V6 spring. This is the big block spring, and this is a spring by Precision that's actually modern style variable rate spring. So this particular spring actually works for all three V8s, 305, 350, and 454. I don't know, we're just not even going to talk about the diesels because there's a lot of differences there. But obviously when you are going from a V6 engine that weighs about 425 pounds to the 454, which is 685 pounds, you've got to replace your springs. You cannot use these things. However, if you are doing an LS swap from a V6, you're probably just fine keeping your original V6 springs, especially if your truck had air conditioning. Like a fully dressed 5.3 liter is about 460 pounds. Really, if you put some really good shocks on here, you don't have to replace those the V6 springs unless, of course, yours are worn out and rusty. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of do the fast motion thing when I take this all off, but I'll go over it with you just briefly. But remember, again, there's so many videos out there on rebuilding the front end of an OBS truck. In fact, Eric the Car Guy's probably got the best video on doing a full suspension rebuild on an OBS truck. I'll put the link in the description below for Eric the Car Guy. He's a longtime YouTuber, lots of great stuff. So briefly, and I've already done this, is first thing you want to do is you want to take your shocks off. And here's kind of a pro tip. Before you jack up your truck, while it's still on the ground, go ahead and loosen and remove the upper shock bolt. It'll make it a lot easier. It's still compressed and make it a lot easier to take that bolt off. So, okay, and then of course, remove the bottom two bolts, which are down there. And then remove your sway bar end link. And again, I've already done both sides. And next is the tie rod. Remove that, and then I'll come back here in just a minute and show you how to properly get the springs off without killing yourself, because springs can be extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. I mean, if a spring under pressure hits you, you're pretty much dead. Okay, so here's another pro tip, as you were. When you take your nut off, do not take it off all the way. Leave it on, about halfway. Not all the way at the top like that. Give yourself some room on here, and before you try and take the tie rod off. And of course, pick your favorite BFH and whack it. Oh, there we go. That'll just make it a lot easier when you pull it off and then fall on your foot or something. Okay, one of the first things you want to do before you do anything else is you want to take a jack and jack the suspension up so that you can get under here to get these bolts, because when this thing is all the way into down position, you can't get under there. Okay, so next up, we've got everything loose. So leave your upper castle nut on. Put your jack underneath the control arm, give it some pressure, then loosen the rear control arm bolts. Then with pressure pushing up on this, take off that castle nut, the bottom castle nut right there. Okay, so take off your castle nut from the bottom. Again, your upper one is going to stay on, and you've loosened your rear control arm bolts. Now you're going to slowly let this down. Now this is for the V6. I'm not sure how much pressure the V8 has, but the V6 is fairly easy, and you shouldn't, actually it's probably a good idea to take a ratchet strap and wrap it around that thing, but I've done this a few times now, so I know what I'm doing, more or less. So, Now there is now basically no pressure on your spring. Pull this back out, pull your spring out. All said and done. Okay, here is the V6 motor mount. All right, you see that it has this plate with 4 bolts in it, and then the motor mount clamshell is actually part of this plate. It's welded on. It's this right here. Then there's also a 5th bolt on the back side of the frame that you have to remove. And everybody bitches and complains about this, and that's because it's a pain in the ass to remove. And that's pretty much everything I've found online, and of course on some of the YouTube videos and some of the forums and stuff. Nobody ever really talks about the V8 motor mount, because I think a lot of guys are just, if their motor mount's good shape, you can actually use the stock motor, well, you do use the stock lower motor mount part when you even put an LS in here. So let's get to the actual problem and why this is such a pain in the ass to get out. Okay, so here is the problem why it's so hard to get to these motor mounts. All right, so let me back up. Well, shit, it's so bright. Okay, so as you can see, this is the bottom of the frame. That's the sway bar. This big hole right here, it's trying to get you oriented. That is the spring, where the spring goes in. And then these are the front and rear lower perches for the lower control arm. And that's why you have to remove them. Let me show you. All right. So, hopefully we can see up inside. So this is up inside the spring perch. Okay, there are 2 bolts. There's one here and one there. That's the upper bolts on the motor mount bracket. And now, inside the pocket, there are the other 2 bolts. Now this is the pocket right here where the lower control arm, the forward section of the lower control arm bolts into. Okay, so this is a good angle here. I am underneath the driver's side. There's actually 6 bolts. Okay, you've got these 2, those 2, then you have this back bolt here, and I don't know if we can, and then that guy right there. Okay, and we'll go outside. And you have these 2 side bolts here. So there is 6 total bolts to remove the motor mount for a V6 on the driver's side. Oh, and here's something fun I discovered. See that empty hole right there? Yeah, it's missing the driver's side main motor mount bolt. The engine's not even bolted in on this side. Jesus. Okay, so then over on the passenger side, you only have 5. So here's that extra one here, and you have to get to it from up inside the spring perch. And the reason I did this and had to make these extra brackets like this is because the mount sits, for the V6, sits further back than square onto the bottom part of the frame like a V8 does. So that's why they did all this complicated shit. Okay, so as you can see right here, I have the engine jacked up right now and getting ready to remove the 5 bolts off the passenger side. Oh, and by the way, take the starter out before you try and do that. It's much easier. All right, let's get the other side done now, shall we? Okay, well, as you can see, they're out. And it's just, man, I mean, these things are just flat evil. That's all I can say. Okay, it's kind of a comparison of, so you understand how these things work if you haven't done it before or seen it before. Again, this is the driver's side or the left side mount, which has 6 bolts that bolt it to the frame. And then of course you have the passenger side, the right side, has 5 bolts. The clamshell is actually part of the part that bolts to the frame. And then the motor mount itself, the rubber part right here, is actually the part that is bolted to the engine. Well, it's completely different for the V8s. The clamshells on the V8 engines, all 3 of them, I'm not sure about the diesel, not going to talk about that, these bolt to the engine itself. And then the motor mount actually bolts to the frame for the V8s, for all 3 of them. Oh yeah, and this is one of those instances where you will have leftover bolts. Also, when you go to put these motor mounts on, sorry, my neighbor's fixing his fence. It's kind of confusing with all these holes. There's 6 holes. It was like, what do you use? Well, okay, you see this and this and right there. That is actually, those are actually rivets, riveting these 2 pieces together, okay? It's not where your bolts go. So your bolts are gonna go here and here and in the middle. Because remember, there's only 3 for the V8 motor mounts. That's it. Okay, about to do the really scary part. Springs scare the shit out of me, so I've been putting this off for several days. Okay, so this is the spring compressor you want to use for a job like this. Something like this. There's a couple of different brands, but this is a really good one. Now, what you don't want to do is you do not want to use this one or this one. In fact, the second one, that's basically for struts. And the first one, that will kill you. And a lot of people will go rent them from O'Reilly's and places like that, and you have no idea how they've been used or treated, because this, the one with the hooks on it, you're not supposed to use an impact on here, but everybody does. But if you read the instructions on it, it says don't use an impact on it. This is actually designed to, yes, you must use an impact on it. And it is extra heavy duty. This is the one you want to use, okay? Everything's internal, it's already factory greased in there, and it's got massive plates, and it locks in, and it's pretty much bulletproof. Now, again, probably one of those little clamp ones will work just fine on the 6-cylinder springs. These things don't weigh very much. You see, this thing is, it's pretty lightweight. This is a freaking monster. I mean, you could do curls with this thing, right? It's huge. So you definitely want to use a spring compressor that can handle this power, because it will kill you if you don't do it right. All right, let's get to work, because this part scares the crap out of me. I hate coil springs. Okay, another thing you definitely want to do is replace your coil spring isolators. The little donut thing that goes on top of the coil spring, in the coil spring pocket, and it keeps the coil spring from chattering, basically. As you can see, and this is the good one. So definitely go out. These were 20 bucks for both of them, O'Reilly's. Okay, one more little item here. Pro tip. When you install these things, take a little bit of silicone, put it on top of the donut, and then stick it in there. In this case, that's actually a toggle bolt. And then I'll try and lighten that up in editing, but so that's toggle bolt, and that's just a piece of steel that I found, and just hold it in place and let it sit there about 20 minutes or so, and then you won't have a problem putting this thing in, because it won't stay up there by itself, and it sure as hell won't stay on top of the spring, and you'll just end up pinching it or damaging it. So might as well stick it up there. Okay, my apologies. My allergies are killing me. Zyrtec ain't working. Flonase ain't working. None of that shit's working. So there's gonna be a lot of sniffling and shit here, because I gotta get this done. Oh, shit. Okay, one thing to keep in mind when you're doing this is there's an upper and a lower plate for this. Make sure that when you put your lower plate in, that you've got it on the opposite end of this spring, of the bottom part of the spring right here, because that, I hope you can see that, that hits the spring pocket on the bottom of the control arm, and if you have it turned around too far over, you're actually going to hit the control arm right there. So be careful, because that's what I did. So that's how I figured that one out. Another thing is read the instructions that come with your springs, because the instructions on this particular spring says do not compress more than 3 coils. So, might as well follow suit on that end. Okay, so now the scary part. Shoving this thing up there. Probably gonna not be able to see it too well because I'm gonna be in front of it, but you get the general picture. I think you've done this before. Damn it, I got more snot. Sometimes it can be a little bit pain in the ass, but you basically twist this thing around once you get this thing out. And there we are, and it's even seated correctly in the pocket. So, there you go. Let's just put it all back together and we're off to the next thing. I think y'all know this part. Well, as you can see, that was a lot of fun. Actually, in my opinion, that's going to be the hardest part of all of this, is doing the freaking motor mounts and the daggum springs. The rest of it, I think, is going to be pretty, I'm not going to say that, it's just going to jinx it, right? Yeah. So I hope you all enjoyed this one. I know it got a little long, but there's a lot of information in there. Hopefully the next few are going to be a little bit faster and that kind of stuff. When we get to the wiring, that's going to get a little complicated, so we may be really getting specific on that. So that should be a lot of fun. I'm kind of excited about that because I like wiring. So anyway, till the next one. Like, tag, follow, share, all of that YouTube fun stuff, and hope you enjoyed the series. Boys, you be safe. He drank all my beer again. What am I gonna do? Y'all take care now. And I can't walk past the frame, so.